The Why Didn't You Test That podcast want to improve your software. Join Hugh, Rich, and their guests. They share experiences and insights on the many sides of better software delivery.
Hello, good people. We're back.
Hello.
Hope you had a good week. We've got Gunesh. I think we didn't finish last time, really. I thought we said we did, but actually chatting about it afterwards, there's a bit more to be discussed, and we were just having a bit of a discussion before we piled into it about a minute ago. So welcome, Gunesh, again, and hello, young Rich. How are you doing?
Hello, very well, thank you.
What are you wearing on your chest today?
As I promised last time, I wear the Swindon top. So this is the Swindon away top, 23-24. Third in the league at the moment. Come on.
Excellent. And yes, right. Anyway, enough of this. So let's just roll on. Okay, so Rich, why don't you just kind of summarize up a little bit quickly where we kind of ended off last time. I'm going to probably just do a little bit of ringmaster stuff and stick my oar in a little bit from time to time, but it sounds like you two have already got kind of a little bit of agenda sorted out. So off you go, chaps.
If you recall from the last one, what we talked about was really our shared journey around the topic of automation to start with, and how we've gone from a centralized test automation capabilities and anti-pattern to realizing that actually federation of test automation skills into teams that actually do the work is a very good thing. Actually, automation on its own is not enough, and therefore that needs to be underpinned by good foundations around how the system works, good structured analysis, if you like, around how that works, and that leads into things like modeling. Really taking that a step further, modeling into collaboration. So we talk about disciplines like BDD to both get transparency around how the system should work, but also depth around how we know that we don't understand how certain elements of a system works, and a realization within a whole team that you should expect complexity, you should expect unknown, and it shouldn't be a surprise, right? Don't just dump those things into testing and integration testing and do those things at a very late in the day exploratory exercise. And how do you create isolation within test phases, but then that filters into how do you separate out your architecture, how do you separate out your environments, etc., in the context of an area or technology or an architecture that already existed, and a test approach, again, that already existed, be that not quite as efficient as it could be. We really talked about the mechanisms, techniques we use to break down those anti-ways of working, if you like, including technologies, but including architecture, but also we touched on the people element of that as well, and, inevitably SIs and how they work together within larger organizations. That's only half the story as far as kind of our time at Nationwide goes, and kind of my and Ganesh's kind of relationship at Nationwide, if you like, and really what we wanted to move on now is kind of the second part of that, which is a bit more, I say, visionary, or a bit more greenfield, and this is where we had great opportunity. Nationwide were always in a place where they were trying to innovate, they were trying to bring in agile DevOps ways of working. Some of that was a little cargo cult, some of it in certain areas absolutely bought into doing it the right way, and one of those areas was the said middleware team that we're talking about now, and what they were doing, they were bringing in a capability built fundamentally. It was built on Kafka and event-driven architecture, plugged into a couple of legacy systems that we've already talked about, very heavy lifting ERP system and a legacy mainframe system that you might talk about. So it's a new architecture approach opportunity, but very much plugged into an aged estate, if you like, or a bedded in estate. Now what I wanted to start the conversation around was this project or this program or this it wasn't really a program, was it? It was a squad. It was a squad on a team within a squad, was given an opportunity to set out a way of working, if you like, a blank canvas. So really I wanted to touch on that, and very early doors.
Sorry to jump across so early. Nationwide wanted to try something new. I mean, where's that come from? At what level of management did someone do that? Because, I mean, the reality is, we talk to people all day long, Rich, and you're not getting that from management anymore. It kind of used to be almost built into the DNA of IT, and then it became sort of tied to an individual manager's kind of let's go for it until they fail. We talked about this a little bit before, but so what was it about Nationwide where they actually were given, tried to be able to do that?
All organizations, I think, are trying to adopt a more agile little A way of working. Okay, and I think at the core of that is experimentation. All right, and I think at the top, that's why senior leaders are trying to do it. I think the problem becomes as it proliferates down, you get a bit of cargo cult around what is agile, what is DevOps, and you could summarize what's DevOps. A lot of the time, it's a pipeline of tools.
So cargo cult, by the way,
no, it's not.
People might not be familiar with that phrase. Look it up on Wikipedia. It's actually kind of a hilarious story, and that's basically the idea of copying the veneer without actually looking at the substance. And I think that's the phrase that people might not be familiar with. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah.
It comes from the Second World War, right?
Yeah. And so
which hasn't yet happened according to Trump, by the way.
We diverge.
Back on track, lads. Get back on track.
So what does DevOps become in this cargo cult? It becomes a pipeline of tools, right? And it's not. What does Agile become? It become 2-week sprints where everybody goes to the stand-up, and almost that's what cargo cult becomes. And so, I think a lot of organizations miss that. Within Nationwide, we were an ecosystem, right? So don't get me wrong, we didn't do it as a one-stop shop and we got it right first time, not by any means, right? We'll discuss that. But we had both support up the top, but we had a setup that allowed us to try and innovate, right? So we had a ways of working capability that was there to incentivize, share working practices, innovation. We were encouraged to go out and seek guidance from industry. And when you go and do those things, you tend to, yes, get a bit of cargo cult, but then you start to tap into the real source of this is what it really means, and this is what you need to start doing, right? And one of the things that we were able to do is experiment on these things and get them wrong and then get them right. And I think this talks to our journey around automation as well, right? In terms of the anti-pattern kind of 10 years ago, we wouldn't do now, and we learned certain things. And I think the same story goes a lot in terms of this blank canvas. We had the opportunity to put a lot of things that we know didn't work right, because we knew exactly what things we would face into, what challenges we would get. And so, that's really, this blank canvas gave us an opportunity to, without sounding arrogant, to show off about the things that we knew that we could do right very, very well. I don't know about yourself, Gunesh, in terms of how you felt about that.
Yeah, like you also mentioned, right? That Nationwide starting something new did sound a bit of daunting at that point of moment, because that kind of thing was never done at Nationwide, that getting into a blank canvas and then just doing it all over. Because Nationwide, being the size of the customers and the base that they have, with huge other building societies merging into them, they had a lot of things going around, and doing something like this was really challenging ourselves to get on with the latest and greatest of the technologies, and then prove that we can build something which is there. And I think the whole intent actually gave a very good, I won't say free hand, but more of a liberated way of looking at things. That okay, if this is not something that has worked, let's drop it, and then let's go for something which might have worked, or which has worked slightly, let's say 5-10% better than what we previously did, because there's a chance and there's a way to do better things. And the way the teams were rearranged at Nationwide, I think that was also one of the key factors. Like you said, right? There's the Agile gets transformed into like 2 big sprints, and then people doing stuff and then coming back in the same waterfall way again. So that was not the intent. I think one more factor that actually helped was the clear target of the outputs that we want from the system, which were set. Like we wanted, let's say 99.9999 availability, and that's what we are aiming for. And if we have to aim for that high, then we can't really go for the methods which haven't worked for us. And in that sense, I think one of the key factors, like when you or some other people, even Martin for that matter, who are actually going into actual technical depths of the things or the tools that we want to actually explore, and see to it that it will actually work. So even the holistic approach that we had at that point, when all the architectural teams came together, BAs came together, everyone from the other aspects were represented, and then they started doing that. And the first POC that they did on, I think they did it on CIS, right? So that POC, the way it was handled and the whole direction actually gave it a good coverage, and also a good platform to showcase people, like you said, like, and not sounding arrogant, but to show off that, okay, this is what we can achieve. So yeah, I mean, that was really well executed, and I think apart from the technical freehand, I think more key was the collaboration between the teams.
Absolutely.
And the way it was done.
I think when you say it's well executed, I always come back to, you talk about shift left, right? I always come back to, I remember having a session, and I bear in mind, I wasn't working directly in this team, right, but I went along to that session with the rest of the team that were working in there. There was a very early session with the architect around, and at this point, the whole solution was a concept, right? It didn't exist. And we had a walkthrough of what the intent was and started talking about the test approach, didn't we? And it was quite interesting in the you know, a traditional way of working there was that the architect would kind of give an overview of how the system should work and then talk about how it would be, how it might be tested, right? And it was quite interesting, right? And what they started talking about was, you know, this is how it works. This is the technology. Bearing in mind Kafka. Services going into Kafka, there is this same middleware concept that we talked about last time. There is isolation in the architecture. Yes. What they then started talking about was an end-to-end testing solution, right? I think it's quite interesting in that almost if we'd have just gone along with that, we would have got ourselves into a pattern, an anti-pattern, if you like, of being stuck in big end-to-end accidental complexity that let's face it, Nationwide did, whether it was Agile or not, a waterfall, or you know, these legacy problems that it built up over time, and so many other organizations do it because at concept that was the way of working, or the predetermined way that we should approach this thing. I think quite interestingly, actually, we'd gone in with these preconceived agendas, if you like, that we will go in and we will create this isolation, right? Tell me about your thoughts from that time. They may differ from mine.
Well, not that much. I think you had a bit of inside information on that. I was slightly away from that information, maybe, but I still remember on that ground floor of the office, they had a huge 2 rooms connected together. The whole team used to sit there, and the room had a label of speed layer, and it was like, if you have seen in the movies, like when they were developing a bomb or something, they had whole team isolated, and they would do their own thing, and everything and everyone around would wonder what are they actually doing, what's happening. So that suspense actually was something that actually got me curious about these things, because once they set up, we looked at around 1 or 2 weeks what's happening. We couldn't get a handle. So then I went ahead and talked to Martin, and he said, oh, this is what we're doing, and that's how it's happening and everything. But this is just a POC phase. We're still doing it, but we have a good handle on it. I said, oh, wow, I would like to see the product which is coming out. So he said, yeah, we have a couple of sprints to go, and then we'll come up with a prototype, and then we'll try to propagate it further to the other SORs that we have. I said, wow, that's fantastic idea. What are we doing in terms of strategy? So then Martin, with his immaculate documentation skills, he showed me that test strategy document which he had, and that was one amazingly documented piece of thing that I saw, and I was really impressed by the way they had put everything together. Speaking of isolation, they had also taken care of the data dependencies even before they actually started doing it. So I was really impressed by that, because the way middleware was thought of in Nationwide, this angle of looking at middleware was never in place, and having that level of isolation, not only into the components, but also into the stages that you would test that particular whole end-to-end thing. Like you said, it might have gone into an anti-pattern very soon, but it didn't happen because they had that isolation very well thought out. They had the technical aspects married very well with those components so that they enable them to have that component level testing done. And I think that was a very critical factor in the success, because they were able to test the increments really fast with that particular approach. If they hadn't done that, then they would have definitely ended in that anti-pattern that you said, that okay, now we have this component but you can't test it. So when it gets integrated, then we'll go ahead and test it. That's not how it works, right? So you need to have a testable piece which is very small, and a deliverable at end of every sprint where you can increment that particular development and add value when you're actually doing it, right? So that mindset they really imbibed in that team, and I think that was also one of the factor why they could have the level of achievement that they did.
How did the teams communicate then? Because if you're obviously working in parallel, some people ahead, some people behind. At which stage did this stuff all get integrated together? And when they tried to glue it all together, did it all kind of fall down in a heap? Or, how was the comms between the teams managed? You're smiling, Rich.
Oh, it never. As I said, this is where the teams worked very, very closely together, right? And I think where from the very start, right, because I mentioned these big systems that it bolted onto, right, there was very early the recognition that certain things weren't understood as well as they should do, right? I think that heightened the need for collaboration, proving things early, exploring things early, and that created the ground to get a hell of a lot of structure in there, and that was something that fed all the way through, right? I would suggest that team very strong when it came to analysis, right? And part of that analysis using modeling, right? Because modeling became the living specification to understand how the data flowed. The team became very effective at managing cognitive load, right, and complexity. And when new things were coming on, getting early insight into how those things might work, flagging up what we did and didn't know. Going back to the cargo cult, the team were adopting DevOps, right? And they had a lot of the tool sets that you would expect in ephemeral environments going out into cloud. But I think underpinning it, and this is where you get into Google DevOps, 3 fundamentals of DevOps. You'll get flow, experimentation, and feedback, right? And they are, I would suggest, the building blocks that team became very strong at facing into, right? One of the things I will always remember, right, Snowy kept giving me tidbits around kind of metric, and to Ganesh's point, I'm very interested in metric around these things. We used to have, from a data perspective, a gold set of data for customers, right? And so 250,000 customers that would satisfy the ecosystem that was nationwide testing for, 3 months, 6 months, right? But we knew that would satisfy all test teams, all test data that they would need from a customer's perspective. SpeedLayer took that one step further, or this program took this one step further, where their data requirement for customer or transactions was just 5,000 records of data, right? And so if you can profile it down that low, and essentially you have a data set of 5,000, you have options about how you want to then use that, right? So you had ephemeral environments where, we talk about data virtualization and things like that. Actually, with ephemeral environments, as long as you've got the files to then load it into that environment, why do you need virtualized environments, right? I guess is where you're coming from. And this gave us a hell of a lot of flexibility and fast feedback, which again, if you go back to the underlying principles of DevOps, it's ticking the boxes in terms of that, right? It doesn't mean you need to use a certain tool. It's what's the best way of getting to the end outcome that you're actually after. And that was fast feedback, limited effort on our part to actually go and do that again and again and again. Yeah. And we appreciate that we had a lot of moving parts. How do you make sure that you've got a heavy checking strategy in there for all those moving parts? And that's where you get a lot of service-based testing going on when builds happen. But you've got a lot of exploratory stuff in there, and this harks back to the very good analysis. Team Ferret, I think I've called them in a previous pod, where they were the ones that did the kind of the early reconnaissance team, if you like, going in and understanding where those challenges are, and then asking difficult questions that no one really understood the answer to.
Yeah. And adding to that analysis part, right? I was actually looking at one of the models that Simon built of the CIS tables. They had the understanding of every column in that table. I highly doubt anybody took that much effort any time before in Nationwide to actually go on to a table column level to understand what that column is related to a business case. So that was the level of analysis that they went into in that particular project. And I think that level of understanding and marrying that with the model that they had, I think that gave them an edge of using that model to its highest power. And they could really relate those columns to the actual business cases. So I was looking at the model inside model thing that he had built, right? It reminded me of the Inception movie that I saw. It was going within and within and within, but it was so effective that you would never lose track of anything. And I think apart from analysis, putting that in that way was also one of the very key moments of that project, because they invested that many hours in actually analyzing and actually understanding the business. That actually gave them they had won half the game when they did that.
I think the interesting thing on that, and even stakeholders in the Nationwide would say, well, that would just slow us down. We can't do it. Right. But I think, it didn't slow us down. Actually, it sped us up in the long term. Right. And again, if you go back to the DevOps principles of flow, one of the sub points of that is trying to gain an ever increasing understanding of the system. And this is where I come back to the team through models and other attributes were very good at handling cognizant load, complexity, because they started building and maintaining models of how the system should work, right? Rather than, I think a lot of teams are guilty of static documentation that very quickly ages, and then you've got this dynamic of it's too much effort to try and update it, and therefore we'll try and use head knowledge, and that's a big problem in many organizations, be them aged or not. If you take Agile, possibly the cargo cult mechanism, you've got change going in every 2 weeks, right? And therefore, if change provides chaos to understanding of a system, you've got chaos going into a system every 2 weeks, right? And I guess the mark of sustainability is how well as a team and architecture, etc., do you manage that chaos being injected, right? If you're very good at it, then you sustain your change cadence. If you're not very good at it, you gradually coming to a halt, right?
Yeah, and like you said, that Agile thing of doing that every 2 weeks, that particular cadence would only be achieved when you put that much of effort in the analysis. Otherwise, those 2 weeks, if you look at it, they may be really, really big time period if you have everything figured out. If you don't have, like you said, like if you have the chaos as an input, that chaos would anyways translate into the system, and then everything bursts open, right? That's something that they really understood really well at the very beginning. There's also one aspect of test data that you briefly mentioned about ephemeral environments, and then they directly putting that into the SORs. But I think one of the other practice that I saw there, that when they had those Kafka pipelines done, they had a way of pushing those messages directly on any of the Kafka pipelines that they wanted in any of the format that they wanted. So if anything in between which fails, which goes back to the component level. Component integration comes after when you have proven the component. So to prove that component, they had a good test data. Even I think they were also doing it via model. So they had direct hooks into model for creating that test data for them. So they didn't really rely on the actual test data and getting that into the system and what would happen and how it would happen. So yeah, I think from a clarity point of view, I think that project was 100 on 100, and they really reaped the benefits of it because of this whole time they put into of the analysis and getting that clarity on the business, on what really the business wants. And yeah, I think that was one of the key factors that they really aced in that particular period.
Just kind of segueing into another conversation, we've kind of touched on organizational experimentation. Done well in this instance. I think we're also familiar with organizations that are looking to gain agility, arguably back to the cargo cult point. They spin up, say, startup teams, and one of the anti-patterns that certainly we would have seen is kind of the throwing away. And you've got a spectrum of controls, right? In that a large organization will tend to have a bit too much bureaucracy control around certain things.
Yes.
You spin up these startup organizations with absolutely no controls, right? It's almost they've got free reign to do whatever they want.
Yeah.
You talked about one of those startups within Nationwide getting it right. Did you have any exposure to any of the startup teams perhaps not doing the right things?
Well, I won't say exposure as such, but I mean I've obviously heard stories of things not going so well when these sort of teams are spun up, right? So I think in one of the instances there was a team where they wanted people to have all the skills, so they should be able to do everything that is needed in that particular cycle. So they should be able to design themselves, code themselves, test themselves, and also showcase that product themselves. So I think the free reign has those. You have to set the boundaries around it, otherwise that are meant for failure, right? So the team that I'm mentioning, they did a fairly good job for, I would say, a quarter, around 5 or 6 spins that they had. And when they actually started getting into the core of the application, they lacked some of the qualities that are needed by each of the role, and everyone doing all the things and all the time doesn't work, because like they say in cricket also, if you have all-rounders, let's say you have 11 all-rounders, that is not a guarantee that you'll win the match. You still need the specialists which are to be there, right? So that those teams need to have that mix. And when you have that mix, then you can rearrange, get some of the strengths from other people, compensate for the skills that you don't have with the skills that the other people have. And like that, you are able to succeed. But again, even if you are spinning up these teams, you should allow them to fail, and then they can learn from it and then do for it. I think in one of my experience, we were trying to build one of the Cucumber driven framework in one of my recent experience. It sounded like a really great idea when we started, because business was also using BDD, we were also using BDD, all is well, and all the sunshine and rainbows, right? So but after that, after 2 or 3 spins, we were like, 2 more people joined us, and then they had a slightly hard time to understand how the things are written. Even though they were documented, they would have their own style of doing it. And that actually set us for a failure. And then at one point, we just decided that this is too much effort that we're putting in actually deciding things. Let's break it down. Let's go back to our original framework, and let's get it done there. We don't have to scrap everything. We still were able to use around 60-70% of the time, but we still gained on a beautiful insight that just because business is doing something, it's not always the way that you should also be doing it the same way. Everything differs from the skills that you have in the team, the understanding that you have in the team, and those things are really crucial in that success, or in this case, the failure.
You touched on kind of the point I wanted to really bring up, which is like 2 or 3 sprints fine, and then sustainability became a challenge.
Yeah.
I think it's a really, really interesting point, and I kind of talked about kind of the need for modeling or fundamentals or foundations, or a structured approach to that. In that, I think a lot of teams wanting to go agile, especially in a greenfield startup, everything's basic, right? And therefore, this is too basic. Why do I need to document it? Let's just go straight for automation, right? And there's simple, and all of a sudden, complexity's crept up on you without you even recognizing it, right? And you find yourself in a position where you've built up all this collateral, and then you're at crossroads, which is, oh, I know I should have gone more structured, but I've got all these assets now. How do I go more structured? Or do I just carry on the same trajectory, which is ultimately introducing more chaos, slowing me down more and more?
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting dilemma that I say a lot of teams, be them startup or not, probably find themselves in far more than they would like to acknowledge themselves. You see a lot of anti-patterns around bloated test packs. Far too much end-to-end testing arguably is an anti-pattern around that.
Yeah.
So I know you mentioned around the team were doing kind of gherkin there. Again, in our experience, I think gherkin is good to a point in that it's a very good collaboration tool, but it's static in itself, right?
Yeah.
And when you try to do gherkin to something overly complex, it kind of removes the kind of the readability from it, because all of a sudden you've got this big algorithm that is very hard to understand, right? So how then modeling for a second? How do you face into that in nowadays in your current guide, or how have you seen it faced into? Either through modeling or through other means.
Like you said, it's a collaboration tool. The way it is being pitched these days is it's a testing framework to start testing, and everyone has experienced it, that this particular tool is only good for having that collaboration and that clarity. Once you start seeping it down the pipeline, there are very much detailed aspects that need to go into that specification, which is not actually okay for using Cucumber for it. But surprisingly, I would actually overturn that point, but you said modeling aside, but in that particular project that we had, right, we actually did it really well using that model, the Cucumber scripts that we had, though they were very, very huge. But that's why I think if we take gherkin as a mechanism to do BDD, that wasn't what we were using. We were using gherkin as an accelerator from models to automation framework. So you're cheating in your answer there. Yeah, it was actually if you look at it that way, it was actually the same. But I think model actually saved us from it, from getting onto that slippery road of failures using Cucumber or gherkin, right? And I think that was one of that was the savior, because it gave a structure around it. The main problem of what I recently also saw is, if you don't have a structure around Cucumber, which everyone in the team understands, and they have only limited number of options to write the way it has to be written, then you don't have any issues. But once it getting into the flavors of each and everyone's way of writing and their way of expressing those behaviors, then is the point that it gets tricky, because then you don't have any control of restricting people on writing it in their own way. Though you might have a very immaculate documentation, a nice Confluence page where you have everything written down, but if people don't follow it, there's no way of enforcing that, right? And then you get into that vicious circle of feedback, and then again getting into the rewriting, and all these things keep creeping up, and then you actually lose the momentum that you actually built up, let's say 2-3 sprints down the line, and that actually boils down to losing your scalability, which you thought you had, but then it just crumbles down, right? So yeah.
Cool. So you left the good ship Nationwide 2 years ago now? Was it?
1.5 years. Yeah, sorry, 1.5 years.
Oh,
yes. Yeah.
Time flies.
But
you're still an advocate for model-based testing, or the mindset of model-based testing. So I'm keen to understand what's effective in what you're doing now.
So in my current role, actually, the way I always say this, but the model-based testing that we did, that actually changed the way I look at things and perceive things, the way they are presented to me. So model-based testing made that fundamental change in the way I think or look at things. And that has helped me in the new role as well, because when I came in that role, we had major challenges with the automation that we were doing. And the first...
Fundamentally, I appreciate you might not want to answer this question. Fundamentally, the same challenges that we kind of discussed?
Sort of, you can say that, sort of. They were not exactly identical, but these were more technically challenging than going towards the test coverage. And on test coverage is still a challenge, but these initial challenges were actually regarding the technical or the infra aspect of how we can actually do this. And though it doesn't sound related to what we were doing from a functional point of view to have that coverage and other aspects of tests enhanced, this capability of asking questions and capability of asking why not, that actually helped me in getting the answers that we needed to elevate our automation execution, get people to agree with me on certain points which they might not have agreed earlier, or they might not have ever tried that approach. So the 3, 4, 5 years that I had invested in model-based testing at Nationwide, they actually helped me build those skills, though they are not really core technical skills, but they actually get the job done more than the technical skills. So I think that was one of the very, very influential thing that happened to me. And yeah, thanks to Nationwide, yourself, and other people who have helped in the journey to get it done, right? But yeah, I mean, if I always wonder, I mean, if I had not crossed that path, what or how it would have shaped my career. But I think things turned out for the good turn, and then
you'd be posting things on LinkedIn about automation frameworks.
Yeah, probably I would be one of those guys, most probably. Yeah. But yeah, fortunately,
so touching on that, and I guess into the future. Obviously, you are the Liberated Tester, right? Which is, yes. I think, is an awesome title. Knowing you and knowing where you've come from, right, and exactly what you just said then. And I know that you're thinking about things around kind of, you know, mindset, and you talk about kind of, I call it the modeling mindset rather than the modeling kind of approach. You want to expand on kind of what you've done around that and kind of where you think that's going to go? Yeah.
So the modeling mindset, like I said, it's more of a behavioral pattern that you develop in yourself, and the name actually struck me when I was just thinking about it, the things that I did across along the career. I think it was that mindset of thinking not differently, but challenging the things of why not we can't do this, or why not this way and only that way, and that has helped getting myself liberated, because I'm not attached to any tools or anything. I usually get into a role and then I look at the tools. That's how I work, because I'm not attached to any tools. Like if you like the Agile designer that we use, right? Even that one was not. I never knew. Like I said on the last episode as well, I didn't know Ready API until I actually got into that project or that team. So that doesn't what do you say, that fear is not there in me, I think. Of not knowing a tool, because I know the way my thinking process has evolved by using this model-based testing. I think that has helped me understand a lot of intricacies really easily and see through the systems rather than, and also I collaborate better because of this particular mindset. And it was all possible because when you actually start building that model, it's the process which actually develops everything in you, right? So, and the way I want to see this happen in the industry is people are now attached to, even if you see a lot of other posts where they are more around the how you use the tool, or how you get X thing done in a Y tool, or how you crack an interview for a next tool. So that whole thing, I mean, I am slightly sad when I see all these things happening, and those things are actually something that people seek, rather than having that mindset of changing our thinking and then getting into that role, or then getting into that particular position. That would make them much more effective than what they would do in the other way. That's what I feel. And that's what the Liberated Tester is about, that people should start changing their ways of thinking and start building a more why not attitude than why or this happens this way attitude. That's something that
served me very well through my 45-year career in IT. Is what the hell are you doing that for in the first place? And I've made a lot of friends, but probably more enemies with that. But that's me. I can do that. So I think we've talked about this briefly before. One of the problems is when people don't, they're technically very sound. What you also don't realize is creativity is massively underrated. You get very postmental, very bright, very intelligent, but creativity is problem solving, spinning things around, looking things from upside down, sideways, inside, time shifting things. I think that is one thing that is very hidden with people, and that's down to people's personality to be able to have the confidence to be able to say these things. And this kind of applies to all industry, but I think the thing with IT is just absolutely massive. Is if you've got a good technical creative programmer, they can be 30 to 40 times faster than anyone else. If you look in any other industry, someone's not building a wall 30 to 40 times faster. Someone's not, picking up rubbish 30 to 40 times faster. I mean, it is absolutely extraordinary, the difference that in our industry. And I think people miss that. Now, you're sort of hinting about this ability to, think outside the box. I hate that phrase. Sort of thinking, challenging, pushing, prodding, poking, etc. But that has to come within the team. And I think probably, even saying you're a tester is not true. You're a designer. You're a breaker. You're someone thinking ahead of the game. You're someone thinking, learning of what's happening. So all of those things are sort of critical in terms of how you're going to change or speed this project up. But I think it's if you're not getting anywhere, or 3 sprints in, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. Then it's just like, let's stop. Let's just stop. Let's just stop. And you've got to have the courage to be able to say that and say, look, we're just doing the same thing. We're doing it worse. We're building up that, every time term is 10% debt, but that 10% debt is multiplied by, it becomes exponential. And then then you're right. Then you basically dig in this massive great hole, and you're never really going to dig yourself out. So I think that's kind of the thing that's the sort of key message here, is the challenging, but then you've got to somehow have the courage, the wisdom, the political nous, or if it ain't working, go somewhere else. Why the hell waste your life if this ain't working? There are plenty of really clever people doing lots of clever, good stuff out there. And I think, this idea of kind of componentizing things, which is kind of what you were sort of talking about here, and this ability to, we're currently doing at the moment. We've actually just spun up a whole branch where it's a bit of a playground. I was just actually not paying attention to you, just listening to some of the chatter with some of the programmers talking backwards and forwards. What about this? What about that? Why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? And we've basically branched it off. Now, at the moment, there's about 19 components in there. All of them are small, isolated components. My job is to get them all working together, but also to play them around. Well, if we got this one, we could do this one before that one, and then we need to organize that one. And what do you think, lads and lasses? Let's just talk this through. So I think those are some of the sort of key things with people in their careers maybe listening to this, is hopefully picking up on Gunesh and some of my comments there. And then Rich, if you want to just kind of, maybe tail it out with what your thoughts on that space as well.
I think what you've just summed up there, you hear a lot of cliches around quality as everyone's responsibility, right? And I think what you've just said there hits the nail on the head, in that actually quality is something that is built out of consensus, conversation, and caring about wanting to do things better, and therefore that's when quality becomes everybody's responsibility. Other times you're just throwing away cliches like shift left and we're doing Agile and all that.
I love it. Gunesh, fantastic to chat with you again. I think we're done now. We'll talk to you maybe next year to see how your career has moved on. We really appreciate you spending a couple of hours with us. Rich, thanks very much for putting this all together. And rock on, people. Cheers then.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Yes. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Why Didn't You Test That podcast. To continue the conversation, head over to curiositysoftware.ie. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.